Next up is the top. So I was poking around my shop for some wood that I could use that would complement the walnut. And like the first box I showed, I'm going to go with sycamore. I had a piece that was big enough, and it's pretty amazing. It was a little thicker. I've resawed it, so I've got a 3/8 piece here. It's just got some amazing figure on it. So I'm going to cut out a section kind of parallel to the grain here that, of course, gives me the length and the width that I need. For the bottom, I'm going to use beech. Once again, it was something I had laying around that was big enough to use. I didn't want to get into a larger piece of material, and this beech is pretty neutral. Complements the walnut once again, and I'm, this is just the bottom of the box, so it's not that big a deal. I just want a lighter colored wood down there, and I may make the little trays from beech also. So I'm going to go ahead and cut these to size. The pieces are going to go into these grooves all the way around. I need a little bit in the width for expansion contraction, but this is pretty narrow. I think it's about 5.5 inches. It's obviously it's quarter sawn material, so it's not going to move much. So I'm just going to cut it about a 1/16 smaller than the dimension between the grooves on the sides and front and back. To get the dimensions, I'm going to measure the length of the groove at the bottom of the groove. So if I set my scale in there so I'm even with the bottom of the groove there, and come over to here, it's 5 7/16. So I'll make the width 5 3/8, and I'll make a similar measurement for the length. I've got these parts cut to size now, but before I go to cut the grooves, I wanted to shoot the ends just to make sure they're nice and clean, and I wanted to show you something here. So what's fascinating about this end grain on the sycamore is, because this is quarter sawn, the rays are running basically parallel to this face. And so what happens is a lot of the grain in this end grain is actually long grain, right? It's the fibers running that direction. So I thought that was pretty cool. So anyway, we're going to go cut the grooves in here now so it fits in the grooves on the sides and front and back. One last thing before I cut these grooves, I keep forgetting steps here. I want to make sure these surfaces are nice and smooth before I cut the groove, because if I cut the groove first and then sand or plane these surfaces, I may affect the fit. So I've sharpened my plane up as about as sharp as I can get it, and I've been taking some passes on here to get this smooth, and I'm almost done. So I'll take a few more passes here. Now the sycamore, it has all this ray flake, and if I put the plane in the normal direction, just pushing parallel to the grain, because the ray flake, the fibers are going this way, they tend to want to roll out and tear out a little bit. So when I'm planing something like this, I want to skew the plane so I'm presenting the blade at an angle to those fibers, and they seem to like that a little better. So now I'm taking very shallow cuts here to avoid any tear out. So I'll do this until I'm getting fairly consistent shavings. And I've got my calipers here. I'm just going to double check the thickness before I head over to the table saw, make sure it's pretty consistent. Now I was on the back side to start, so now I'm on the show face. And I'm not getting much shaving action yet, but this is still a little rippled from the planer, so it'll take a few passes to get more consistent shavings. You know, I should also point out I'm planing up against a planing stop, so my board is fully supported on my bench. I like this a little better than putting it between dogs for things like this. All right, so now I'm starting to get nice, consistent shavings here. Okay, I'm finally at the saw. So what I'm going to do is make these cuts like this. I've got the fence and the blade set up correctly now. And note that this is the same setup as before when I cut the grooves in the sides. So you may have to set your fence up again, or perhaps it's still set up from before. I want to make sure that what will be the top is away from the fence. So the thickness of this isn't super important. You know, of course, what matters is where the groove is and the thickness of what's left behind there. So I'll make my first cut on end grain, because I'll probably get a little tear out on the back side, and then I'll turn and chase around like that. And of course, do the same thing for the bottom. So I'll probably start with the bottom first, though. That's the less valuable piece. I've got all my grooves cut now, and I want to, before I glue things up, I want to do a fit check of all the parts. So I put together each of the pieces individually, and things were still a little bit tight as I was putting the top and bottom into the tongue and groove. So I took a few more passes on these top and bottom edges on my shooting board, so everything fits nicely now. Before I do the fit check, though, I need to do a little bit more, and I've already done it to the bottom here, and that is, you know, whenever you put a tongue into a groove or tenon into a mortise, things like that, you've got a part going into a relatively tight area. I want to knock these corners down a little bit, because if I was to put this together and I had even, you know, a little bit of a hiccup along here or something, that can generate shaving or something and really tighten things up. So what I've done is I've knocked these corners down on this upper right here, which is going to go into the groove. I'll do the same thing on these two edges here, same at the top, and then I can try to put this stuff together. The other thing I want to do is, you know, once this is together, this edge. Now I didn't do the rabbet like Matt talks about in the article. I'm just going to leave both of these as grooves. You know, when you look at the box, you're not going to notice if there's a rabbet there or not. So I'm just going to leave it like that. But what I was going to say, the other thing, on the bottom, it doesn't matter. But on the top, on this top edge, when this sits here like that, I don't want this corner square. I'm going to put a bigger chamfer there. So that's the top edge I'll see. So all the way around here, I'll put a chamfer on there also. So very small chamfer on the, you know, tongue and groove, but then a more noticeable chamfer up here. So that's the top. So I'll start here. I'm just going to use my block plane. Now to get inside here, I'm going to use my shoulder plane. Now, I should point out, I want to make sure I do that on the tongue, not on the bottom of this upper lip, right? If I put the chamfer there, when this was together, I'd see a gap there. So I don't want to see that. I only want to chamfer the top of this top tongue. All right, so I'm counting strokes there. That was 10. I think I'm going to go a little more. Okay, I like that. That was 12. All right, I turned another light on here so I get a little better sense of that. So that's looking nice. Let's see how this all fits together now. Okay, that looks great. So there's my mismatched corner. But the rest of them look good. Everything fits nicely, goes together without too much force. So I think I'm ready to glue that up. In order to glue this up, I'm going to tape all these pieces together, and then I can just wrap them around the top and bottom. So in order to get the tape aligned, I'm going to use a piece of wood there and then just put a piece of tape top and bottom. Now this tape, I'm not sure where it came from, but it doesn't stretch much. I want something that's pretty strong and fairly sticky. So this seems to work pretty well. Also, before this step, I sanded the inside of all of these pieces. So everything's nice and smooth now, because that's not going to be possible to sand that after it's all together. Okay. So that'll go together like that. And then I've got a couple more pieces of tape here to close things up. So we'll go ahead and put some glue on here. Okay, it's showtime. I've got everything all ready to go. Got some glue. Now, Matt talks about sizing these joints with some watered down glue. I've never done that. There's certainly nothing wrong with it. I'm sure it helps, but I think if you move quickly, the glue doesn't have a ton of time to soak into that end grain, so I'm just going to go for it. So here we go. Can I just freshen things up a bit? Oops. Okay, that all looks nice. Now I might get a little squeeze out in the corners that might lock this in place, so I want to make sure it's centered on here. So I'm going to move it around. So I'm looking to see that the corners are lined up with the miters. That looks pretty good. Oops. Get rid of this glue. Okay, so I think I'm all set. Got the glue off the corners. So we'll let that dry, and then of course the next step would be to cut the top off.